This is Podcast Theory.
Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Podcast Theory. I'm your host, Jason Sircone, and today it is part 2 of this 6-part series about critical elements you need to consider before launching your podcast. If you missed part 1, I dove deep into mindset. Today, launching into another element that I feel does not get enough love before people dive into podcasting. So, highly recommend if you haven't listened to yesterday's episode, jump back and listen to that. Either wait till you're done here or jump back now. The world is your oyster. But today, I want to talk about time. And when I say time, what I mean by that is this is an element that you need to be considering at every juncture. And it's having an understanding of how much time is required to create your podcast content. And Another reason why I feel many podcasts don't get beyond a few episodes is because the creators behind said podcasts are not thinking about time and how important that is in the overall equation. When you listen to some of the quote unquote gurus on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or anywhere you might stumble upon them in this great digital world we live in, a lot of them believe that the only way that you're going to succeed with podcasting is if you're coming at people every week or multiple times per week and you're staying consistent, blah, blah, blah. Now, again, consistency, yes, that's huge. But I feel consistency does better and is more powerful if it's taken in the context of how you're communicating with your audience. If you are consistently communicating with your audience as to what is going to happen with your podcast, that's going to put you in a position to succeed. Just because you're there every week at 12 o'clock on Thursday, yes, that does play a factor, but you also have to let your audience know exactly what's going to happen if you're taking a break, if something's going to happen the week before and maybe or the next week and there's a preempted episode or you're doing a rerun. Communication is key. But what I think throws a lot of people off is this advice that you hear from a lot of the, again, quote unquote gurus, experts. They say a weekly podcast is absolutely required to succeed. And if you are doing a weekly podcast, maybe you should be considering 2 episodes a week. I'll tell this story from a podcast conference that I was at. This is a very well-known podcaster. I've told this story before. Same guidelines here. I'm not going to reveal the name because I respect this person, and I do believe what they've accomplished in the podcast space says a lot. But this piece of advice I simply did not agree with. Someone in the audience during an open Q&A asked what she could do to amplify her show and get better results. And instead of digging into what she was experiencing up to this point, the person asked, how many episodes are you doing per week? And she said, I'm doing 2. And without batting an eye, the response was, well, you need to do 3. And that advice, it's very antiquated. It can't just be about quantity over quality. You have to consider every element, because perhaps that person was experiencing severe burnout or almost severe burnout just trying to get the 2 out per week. And obviously, if she's asking that question, she wants to experience more in regards to results. And you're saying, well, the only way you really succeed is if you do 3. Imagine adding that layer of work to what's already overwhelming. That's why I just did not agree with that advice, because there was no context. And time is such a critical factor, because if you are running a business, you don't have the time to chain yourself to a microphone and do podcasting every week. It's just impossible to do that. You've got a ton of other responsibilities that you have to take care of. Plus, you more than likely have a personal life. You have family. You have loved ones that need your time and attention. So constantly taking away from doing all the things that you need to do just to have a podcast, that's a recipe for disaster. Probably something that lends itself to why we see so many podcasts not getting beyond a few episodes, because that time factor is not taken into consideration. Now, of course, with your production, you can batch record episodes, which I highly recommend. Set up time to where you're putting together multiple episodes in a single sitting and then having those ready and having those in the bank. That's going to set you up for better long-term success. Batch recording is why I get blown away by the fact that most podcasts don't get beyond a few episodes. You should not be going live with a new podcast until you have a minimum of 12 episodes recorded. And this is for a weekly show. If you are doing a seasonal production, which I'll get to in a second, that's a different story. And that's where the efficiency can really come into play and why I believe so strongly in a seasonal production. But let's say you do want to do a weekly podcast, which is completely fine. You just have to understand how to manage the time. Batch recording is going to be critical in that execution, because if you are not thinking about the content that you have in the vault ready to go out, giving you time to be flexible, you're going to have points where you don't have content ready to fly. And that's going to lead to some very serious issues with your show as well. This is why with weekly production, I stress having a strategy that allows you to have a very strong launch, but then have multiple episodes in the bank already recorded. Until your podcast goes live, the world has existed up to that point without your show. So it's better to put yourself in a position to succeed by having multiple episodes already recorded, produced, and ready to go, versus just putting out one podcast at a time. And then you have to think about what comes next. You have to think about how are you planning out those batch recording sessions and factoring in time for that as you go forward. Because what's going to happen, inevitably, life's going to take place. Things are going to happen to where you just can't sit down to record one week, or you have somebody cancel. I just had this happen to me, and I'm going against my own advice. And this is something that I am looking to take care of for my next season, because I do my recordings live. And the person that wanted to record with me wanted to do a pre-recorded episode, which is totally fine. I have no problem with that. But they canceled on me the day of the recording. And now I'm scrambling to fill in that spot. And as I sit and record this episode, I don't know if I pulled this off. I'm trying. But there's a chance that I won't have an episode this week. And that's on me. I take full ownership of that. Now it's up to me to determine how do I avoid that problem in the future. I'm bringing this advice to you because I want you to never have to have this problem. And the better planned out you are, the better off it's going to be. It all comes down to time. Now, I mentioned a few seconds ago, doing seasonal production. This is why I am such a fan. If you focus in on a certain subject, and maybe something within your brand would give you 8 solid episodes that could be your season. Record them all at once. Have them done. Have them ready to release, whether you do it all at once like it's Netflix, or you drip those out week over week for a 2-month period. It's your call in that respect. But the good news in all of that is that you've now set yourself up to bring good content to your audience. They're not waiting for next week's episode because you said, I'll see you next week. You said, no, my season is now over. I'm going to take a few weeks, a few months, whatever the gap is. I don't recommend going too long, but you don't, and I should, to give you a number, I would say 2 to 3 months before you go back into your next season. You don't want to go too long because, again, everybody's listening to other podcasts. You don't want to potentially lose somebody. But that season production allows you to get incredibly tight and granular with your subject matter. It allows you to build a resource that works for you and your brand when you're sleeping, when you're on vacation, when you're doing things that you enjoy with your friends and family. That podcast is going to be something that people can use to discover who you are. They can learn how you can help them solve the problem they face. And in doing all of that, they're building trust. Now, maybe somebody found you through social media or another means. If they're not ready to move forward yet, you have a resource you can point them towards so they can continue to learn more about who you are, what you do, and how you're going to help solve their problem. Of course, take some time to listen to our podcast. We covered X, Y, and Z in season 1. In season 2, we talked about ABC. It gives them time to learn more about you and why you're the resource that they should trust. As that happens, when they are ready to make that leap and put a buying decision front of mind, You're the one that's there. So building out a podcast in seasonal format allows you to create that resource, but it saves the word of the day, time. It puts that time back in your pocket because you're now putting yourself in a position to where you're flexible. You don't have to chain yourself to be in front of the microphone every week. Create your seasonal content. And then if you want to, even if you're between seasons, maybe something absolutely major happens in your industry and you want to take some time to talk about it. No problem. Just do a bonus episode and you can run that. And now you've got content that you can draw from that episode to use on all of your other platforms. Repurposing is going to be something that we talk about. It's going to be one of the critical 6. Spoiler alert. You probably saw that coming knowing you're listening to me. But nevertheless, time is one of the most important factors to take into consideration before you launch your podcast. Because if you know you've got a lot on your plate each and every week, factoring in a podcast to all of those responsibilities is a heavy lift. Even if you've got help, podcasting isn't just about the podcast itself and the act of sitting down with somebody and having a conversation. There's a lot of pre-planning. There's a lot of pre-preparation. Then there's the actual recording. Then there's all the post work, which is creating the episode, putting it together, building the assets, marketing, promotion, sending all that stuff to the person that you are collaborating with, making sure your audience is aware that this episode is live. There's a lot to it. And if you don't set yourself up to do this the right way, you're going to put yourself in a position to fall flat. I don't say this just because it's a prediction on my part. I'm seeing numbers that reflect this. And my goal has been with this podcast and everything I do in the podcast space to try to bring those numbers more to the positive side of things. That 90% for 3 episodes deal, I hate it. I hate that people have all this passion for podcasting and then only do a few episodes and they walk away. No breakthroughs have ever been discovered in 3 episodes. It's going to take much more than that. So have a solid plan of action and think about the time that you have to produce your show. When you put time at the top of your priority list, it's going to allow you to plan accordingly. So maybe a weekly podcast is not the best way to start. Maybe doing a season is the better way to proceed. You may discover that it makes more sense for you, your brand, and all of the things on your plate on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis to just keep building seasons of your podcast and take some time to really get tight with that content. The other side of that is you may discover just by doing that first season or maybe a second season that you fall in love with the medium and you want to go to a weekly production. No problem. You make plans to make a transition from a seasonal show to a weekly show. That's very incredibly easy because all you need to do is let your audience know we're going from a seasonal production to a weekly production, and we're going to be with you each and every week. Set yourself up to succeed. Understand that you have to batch content, and that's something we're going to talk about more in the next episode. But put yourself in a position to win with time. If you chain yourself to a microphone thinking you have to be there because you were told consistency has to happen. Yes, consistency is big. Like I said, even bigger in the communication side of things. But if you do start to get burnt out because you just don't have time and you don't factor in time to how you're going to produce this content, that is going to lead to some severe flaws and some severe holes in your production process. So please think about the time that you have available and then build out your production plan from there. Think about everything that you want to learn or everything you want to gain from your podcast and everything you want to learn as well, because you're going to be learning a lot as you go. But if you don't have time front of mind, you're going to fall flat. That's going to do it for today's installment of Podcast Theory. This has been part 2 of 6 in the critical elements that you need to consider before launching a podcast. I will be back with you on the next episode for part 3. I did spill the beans saying one thing I'm going to be talking about, but I know I'm jumping ahead. What I said we'd be talking about is batching. That's part 4. I got something else to talk to you about before we get to that in part 3. Make sure that you are strapped in for that episode. I'm looking forward to talking with you then. Until that day comes. This has been Podcast Theory. I am Jason Sircone, and until our paths cross again, good talk. I will see you out there.